the chairperson of the Michigan Return to Learn Council, and also the president and CEO of the Silkman Foundation. Her name is Tonya Allen, joining us now on the Oakland County MegaCast. Tonya, thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Tyler. I appreciate it.
We appreciate having you on. How are you? How are your council members doing?
We are good. We're very busy, and as you can imagine, we are feeling quite a bit of anxiety of trying to get so many competing issues addressed. But we're standing by the mantra that we want to deliver a plan to the governor that is focused on science, safety, and our students.
And that's absolutely what you have to do. You have to put the child first in terms of educating kids in our state. And for those who are maybe not familiar, they haven't been watching the governor's press conferences, they haven't been paying attention to the news, they don't know what's going on. What is the Michigan Return to Learn Council? What is its purposes? What are its goals? And what is it currently working on in terms of plans for the fall?
Oh, great. Thank you. That's a great question. As many of your viewers know, the schools were closed abruptly last school year around April. And so basically what we're attempting to do is to present a set of recommendations to the governor that articulates the requirements for schools, as well as recommendations on how they can open schools and how they can do it safely, so that the students are safe, the educators are safe, and that we can keep our economy going. The worst thing that we could ever do is to open up schools and have any kind of outbreak that actually requires us to close schools, because we all know that we depend on our schools. They have an outsized impact on our public health issues, on our economy, and on how we come back to normal after this in the process of still being in a pandemic.
Being in school and having that in-person experience, interacting with your teacher, definitely, and more, almost as importantly, if not more importantly, those social interactions you have with your fellow students is absolutely critical to the education of our children. And there may be an opportunity to have kids in the school in the fall, especially if we continue on the path that we're on right now in terms of COVID-19 safety and maintaining those social distancing guidelines and so on. But there may also be a situation where a lot of these kids are not going to be able to be in school, either because their parents would prefer them not to be, or because the safety regulations have to be more severe because things don't maintain on as optimistic and pleasant of a path. Is there something in place that the council's working on, that your partnerships with the school districts and leadership throughout the state are working on, to kind of bridge that situation and keep social interaction as critical to the plan, whether it be virtual or in person, for the fall semester?
Yeah, so we are, it's really critical that we create the conditions that are going to be useful for our young people. And I know you've heard this before, and we talk about it as social distancing, but really what we're thinking about is it's physical distancing, and how do we create the kind of social environments that are going to be good for our young people. We know that school teaches us more than just academic topics. It teaches us how to be present, how to read emotions, how to work with other people, all of those things that are necessary for life and for work. And so we're trying to create recommendations that is responsive to the science, but also is responsive to the social emotional needs and the developmental needs of students as well. So we are weighing that deeply, of trying to bring forth that. And what I would say to you, if all things go the way that they're planned, the governor is projecting that we will be in phase 5 of the Michigan Safe Start plan in July. And we want to keep it that way so that we know with confidence that our school buildings can be open. And the recommendations that this advisory council will be giving to the governor are really designed to make sure that we can not only open these schools, but they can stay open, that we have the right protocols in place, the right safety measures that would ensure that we won't have any disruption to school. And then the last question I think you asked, and is an important question, is if families don't feel comfortable sending their kids, will education be available to them. And so there are many districts that are working on dual plans to offer both remote learning as well as in-person learning. We think that every district in our state has to be ready to make that pivot so that it's no longer, we did it last time based on an emergency. This time there should be no emergency, and there should not be a crisis if we had to make such a decision, because we're prepared and we're ready for that. And districts are working on these questions right now, and they're working through these issues through the summer to make sure that we can deliver high quality education in our state for every single student, wherever you might live and whatever the public health circumstances are.
Just a point of clarification for those that aren't familiar, and even for those that maybe are familiar. Your council is making recommendations to the governor on how to best reopen school K through 12 schools come the fall semester. The governor will then take in those suggestions and release a plan mandated to the schools that are then able to use those plans, to utilize those plans and follow those guidelines, but also make their own plans specifically as well on top of that.
Right. So we are going to give broad guidelines and about requirements and recommendations. But each of these plans have to be owned by the individual school district. We need those school districts, those teachers to own the plans and to implement them so that they're responsive to what is happening in their local communities, and they're listening to their parents and their students as well. I think one of the things that the governor is attempting to do with this is to bring the best science and knowledge we know from across the country as well as across the world when it comes to school opening. We want to bring that to Michigan. And then this advisory council is really bringing local context, making sure this is practical and realistic for school districts. Considering you talked this issue up at the beginning about school budgets and the potential for decreases, we want to make sure that we're not putting forth any recommendations that the state and school district can't afford to make. So it has to have that practicality to it. And so we want to bring this best practice as well as local context, meaning Michigan, like statewide context and then local context in these regional areas and at school districts, so that we can present the best plan and the best practices forward. And we're committed to doing that. We're committed to supporting educators in this moment, but we have to abide by the public health mandates that are before us.
Tonya, one of the issues that really was exposed during this pandemic is the divide within our communities. There are a lot of kids that don't have access to the internet. They don't have computers at home. The libraries were shut down, so they couldn't go get on the computers at a library or someplace like that. Will your plan address that divide as well?
So our plan is designed to really help lift up and to avoid any inequities. Now, there are things like the legislature just passed a budget supplement that allowed for additional resources for technology devices and connectivity. It's not enough to cover the entire state, but we do have to figure out how to get those resources into the places where there's the greatest need. And you even talked about this at the top of the session about like these hidden opportunities. Is this a hidden opportunity that pushes us towards smaller class sizes, which we know are important for students? And I think this might be a hidden opportunity too. We need to close that last mile when it comes to connectivity. There are so many communities in our state, particularly in rural areas, where there isn't that level of connectivity. And surprisingly, we don't have it in our largest urban areas as well. And so we have to figure out how to solve for that. And we also have to figure out how to get devices. I think it's going to require state to play a role in that, which they're putting resources there. It's also, and there are going to be more budget supplements and discussions coming forward. So I'm expecting to hear more about that from our legislators. But it also is going to require our districts to lean in on this too, and to make some sacrifices to try and get those costs covered. And then we have community. So we have the private sector, be it philanthropy, the nonprofits, or business. we are all going to have to pull together to be able to deal with these inequities. Now, ultimately, that's just the short term while we're in the middle of the pandemic. But we know that right now in our state, we have inequitable funding systems for schools, period. And this has to be the imperative, in my opinion, for us to solve that. We got to figure out how we make sure that the districts that have the greatest disadvantages, or the districts and students who have the greatest need, that they get those resources. And that's sometimes a hard issue to wrestle with, but we can do it. We've seen the modeling on this issue, and we got to make sure that we don't come out of this pandemic with a lost decade in the same way we did with the Great Recession. It is time for us to prioritize our future, and we know that is our children. We got to get them prepared because they're going to create a robust and booming economy when they enter into it that will allow our state to be successful and prosperous.
Tonya Allen, the chairperson of the Michigan Return to Learn Council and the president of the CEO of the Silkman Foundation with us. We're going to take a quick pause for station identification. Keep us legal with the FCC. You are listening to 89.3 WBLD, Orchard Lake, West Bloomfield, Keego Harbor, Sylvan Lake. 88.1 WBFH, Bloomfield Hills, that's the BIF, out of the Bloomfield Hills School District, and WAHS 89.5, Avondale Community Radio, that is WAHS Auburn Hills, a service of the Avondale School District. And Tonya Allen, you talked to us about the technology gap being something that has to be bridged as best as possible. You and Ronnie both mentioned that. A great article that was posted, I believe, last night from Bridge, Michigan. Give some details on that. Give some statistics from this article. Quote, more than a third of students in districts from rural southern Michigan to Flint to the Upper Peninsula lacked digital access. That was in 2018. In dozens more districts, more than a fifth of students lacked access, either lacking internet access or not having a computer device at home. And 37% of students in Flint community schools had no digital access, 36% in Walden school area schools, 34% in Watersmeet Township School District, and consequently on the other side, in wealthier suburban school districts like in Grand Rapids Forest Hills Public Schools and in the Bloomfield Hills School Districts, both of those, the numbers, 99% access. So that is something that I'm glad to hear, and I'm sure many are going to be glad to hear, is something that the Return to Learn Council and even the state legislature is also addressing, because it's going to be critical, especially if there is distance learning and in-person learning hybrids going forward, or God forbid we have a situation where we have a second wave and it's going to be all virtual once again. It's going to be absolutely critical that we have resources on top of a plan for our students.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the issue is like we are treating computers today and connectivity like they are supplementary, and they're as critical to a young person's education as a book and a pen. We need to make sure that these are tools that are in our schools for the pandemic so that we can manage that with remote learning. But we're going to need it in general. So one of the big issues that you probably heard about is what they call the COVID slide, which means that our students already lost a third of their school year just by schools closing early. And many people believe that they will not retain as much of their education of what they learn, which is they're projecting that students will only retain 70%. Now, when you add that in combination with summer slide, which is particularly egregious when it comes to children who maybe live in high poverty areas, and that's where they lose a lot of that learning because it's not being reinforced during the summer. So we might see some students who have lost up to 6 months of a school year. And if we don't have a strong remediation plan and support, and we know that technology can provide that, as well as good teaching with a teacher in the classroom, but that is it can be reinforced through technology. We need to do that because we have to close the gap, not just open up the schools, but how do we close the gap so that this gap isn't lingering for the long term for our students throughout their academic careers.
For those interested, for those maybe even concerned with the Return to Learn Council, who is on the council? Who is made up of this? Who are these people that are making these suggestions that will ultimately lead to a decision from the governor? I'm sure parents are very curious to know that hopefully this plan is in good hands.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. So there are lots of Michiganders who are interested in this, so much so that we had 1,800 people apply for this council. So it's, and we only selected 25. You have a higher chance of getting in Harvard than you did to get on this council. But I would tell you, it is made up of people who are parents, people who are educators, from classroom teachers, to operation leaders who are in school districts who are running the operations, to superintendents, from principals. We have a student on our commission. We also have public health officials. So people who are working in hospital, epidemiologists, people who work at our local health departments. We also have a set of committees, subcommittees that engage even more people in this. We looked at racial diversity, geographic diversity, age diversity, political diversity. So we wanted to cover the full spectrum to make sure that we were listening to each other across the state and understanding that there are different circumstances. It's very different in a particular community where you may only have 600 kids in your full district and you don't have any COVID cases versus being in a school district where you have 100,000 children in that region. And you might have, lots of cases, and you could have as many as 40 school districts. So we know that our state is very diverse. And so this group of people reflect that diversity, and they're at the top of their game. Each of them are thinking very thoughtfully about this issue. They're spending lots of time on it. We're debating the tough issues, and we're trying to make, again, like I said at the beginning of this, decisions based on science, safety, and our students. Those are the three things that we hold constantly in the center of these recommendations that we'll be sending to the governor. And then we hope will be executed and implemented throughout our state in a way that is supportive to our school districts, not harmful.
Tonya Allen with us, the chairperson of the Michigan Return to Learn Council, also the president and CEO of the Silkman Foundation. Just a couple more minutes with you, Tonya, before we have to let you go. It was reported today by David Eggert of the Associated Press that Michigan's legislator Republicans proposed a $1.3 billion plan to help K-12 schools reopen. Just a brief summary of that plan. It would include one-time funding, including an $800 per pupil increase to address new costs related to COVID-19. That from $3 billion in federal relief. Teachers would receive a $500 bonus. And there is some upset regarding this Republican plan, which would also require in-person K through 5 education at the minimum, refining attendance to allow for online learning and reduce the number of snow days necessarily being taken. The governor's office has reacted to this. Spokeswoman Tiffany Brown, it's called it, quote, disheartening, and said the plan is, quote, a copy of the proposal from the Great Lakes Education Project, a school of choice co-op founded years ago by U.S. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. Have you had a chance to look at that plan? Do you understand what maybe is involved in that? What is your reaction to this plan being released? And does that at all, do you believe, interfere with what the Return to Learn Council is currently operating on?
Yeah, I have had an opportunity to look at it, and my view on it is simple. I told you 1,800 people applied that wanted to have their voices on this. I believe that Republican legislators wanted their voices included too. Glad to have their input, their thinking. We're taking that in account. We'll make sure it's in the plan. Their production is a one-page kind of high-level view on this. And what we're doing is going a lot deeper into this because we know that we have to give our schools some specific direction because that's what they're asking for. That's what the educators on this commission are suggesting to us. we're so grateful that the legislature believes and understands that we have to increase our spending in order to support schools through the COVID. So I'm very excited about that. But ultimately, many of these decisions are the governor's decisions. And we're going to gather all of that input, just like we have seen across the board, and offer up what we think the best decisions are, based again on science, safety, and our students, not on politics. That's not our responsibility to focus on the political divide that we're seeing in the state. What we want to focus on is science, safety, and students. That's what we're about, and that's what we're going to deliver to the governor, and grateful for all of the input and the thinking that others have had. And we know we have to go much further than what we've seen, even in those recommendations.
When will you be presenting your plan to the governor?
The governor is anticipating bringing forth her plan on June 30th to the public. So we'll be getting it to her before then, as you can imagine.
Wonderful. Tonya Allen, the chairperson of the Michigan Return to Learn Council, also the president and CEO of the Silkman Foundation, on with us on the Oakland County MegaCast. Just another minute or so before we let you go. I want to give you some time to talk about what is the Silkman Foundation, and what kind of work have you been doing there before joining the Michigan Return to Learn Council?
Oh, thank you for that question. The Silkman Foundation is a private foundation. We are an endowed foundation, meaning that we use a percentage of our corpus every year, and we make investments in nonprofits and government entities and organizations who are doing right by children. So we focus predominantly in the Detroit area, but we also look at public policy across the state, because we think if we can serve the children who have the greatest need well, then we are going to serve all children better. And so our focus is predominantly on creating opportunities for our children, making sure they have an opportunity to a high quality education, making sure that they have experiences in their community that really are enriching through a robust after school system. And then the last is to make sure that our young people are ready to engage in this ever-changing economy, and making sure that there are college and career pathways that are clear and precise for young people to be in them, so that when they graduate from high school and from whatever post-secondary experience that they have the opportunity to take care of themselves and lift and lead in their communities.
Well, thank you very much for being with us today. Tonya Allen, the chairperson of the Michigan Return to Learn Council and president of the Silkman Foundation. Anything else you'd like to say before I let you go?
No, I just think that we will all need to do our parts. I would just say that there are going to be parents that have to kind of lean in and make sure that their children are following whatever rules or mandates that come from the governor. That we have to respect and support our educators as they try and keep our school buildings safe and their staff safe. That this is really an opportunity for us not to be divided, that we can't afford to divide our attention or our energy. We really have to have it all unified and focused on doing right for our school children, because of its outsized, because of the impact of schools, an outsized impact on all of us, even if we don't have children in our school buildings. I mean, in our homes rather. There's an outsized impact for us on our economy, et cetera. So we have to do this, and we got to do it together. And I think if we all do our part, we're going to be successful. I have every confidence in the citizens in this great state that we can do that, and that we'll do it well in a way that will make us proud, not just today, but when the generations look back on this moment, they'll say that Michigan did it right.
Well, Tonya, thank you very much for being with us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Tonya Allen, the chairperson of the Michigan Return to Learn Council, also the president and CEO of the Silkman Foundation.